Italian Accelerator, episodio 8. Italian Accelerator, episodio 8. Explorer lesson numero 3. Cominciamo subito. Io sono il tuo insegnante di italiano su YouTube, Manu Venditti di Italy Made Easy. Questa è una nuova lezione. Cominciamo subito? No, voglio prima ricordarti che devi vedere l'episodio numero 8 prima e poi tornare qui per continuare l'analisi di questo episodio. Non so come dirlo in maniera delicata, però all'università noi mandiamo studenti in Italia ogni anno, no? Mandiamo 3-4 studenti in scambio. Ci sono studenti che tornano e hanno imparato l'italiano benissimo e hanno avuto un'esperienza fantastica. E sono quelli che hanno passato tutto il tempo con italiani.
Sì.
Però poi abbiamo studenti che tornano, non hanno imparato praticamente niente di italiano, non si sono divertiti e poi quando uno indaga hanno vissuto con anglofoni, quindi o australiani
Sì.
o inglesi o americani, e per 6 mesi sono stati soltanto con persone che parlano inglese e hanno parlato inglese per 6 mesi. Excellent, perfetto. Allora, so Christian learned Italian because he basically lived with Italians who didn't speak a word of English, and then I say that this is kind of part from episode 2 or explainer lesson number 2, but at the university we send students to Italy for an exchange semester or on exchange for a semester, and then we have those who come back and have really learned and improved their Italian, and they're the ones who spent all of their time with Italians. But then we have a second group of students who come back and they didn't have a good time. They didn't really feel like they fit in, and they didn't learn any Italian, like really. And then I say this. I say, actually, that's the expression I want to say. Quando uno indaga, the verb here is indagare, which means to investigate. Indagare. So when one investigates, as in when one digs to really find the truth. So quando uno, why uno? Well, because I don't want to say that when I investigate, like who am I? I just say that when one does something, and that's how you can do this in Italian. There are multiple ways of doing it, like there are in English. One is by using the si that makes the verb kind of like looks like reflexive. For example, in Italia si parla italiano. That si parla it looks like a reflexive, really, but that si is actually not a reflexive pronoun. It's a si impersonale. It makes the statement impersonal, meaning no subject. So when we say in Italia si parla italiano, we say that in Italy they speak Italian, or Italian is spoken, or one speaks Italian. So that is one way, the si. I didn't like it for this instance. It just didn't make sense to me to say quando si indaga, but it's totally possible when one investigates, really. It's really the same meaning, but I prefer the idea of saying quando uno, when one investigates, when one asks questions, then he finds out, or they find out. So, quando uno indaga. Hanno vissuto con anglofoni o persone che parlano inglese, so they have lived. Here's a little tricky verb, and I think it's the verb vivere. Vivere means to live. The past participle of vivere is vissuto, which means lived. But as you know, a past participle is not a full verb. So I cannot say io vissuto, like I lived. It doesn't work like that. We have to use the passato prossimo in Italian, like the past tense, which has the auxiliary and the verb. So vivere, for some strange reason, I know the reason, but it takes both auxiliary. It takes avere and essere with different meaning. So this one is hanno vissuto con. So they have lived with other people. So vivere takes both auxiliary, essere and avere. Now, it's actually very complicated to know when to use essere and avere, but what I have noticed is that avere tends to work in more contexts. So my suggestion to you is to use the verb avere as the auxiliary for vivere. Ho vissuto in Italia, I have lived in Italy, or I lived in Italy. Or in this case, hanno vissuto con anglofoni. They have lived with anglophones. Okay, so it's possible to say io sono vissuto, but the context is just totally different. I don't want to confuse you, so just go with avere it much easier. Grazie che non hai imparato l'italiano.
Sì.
Tu invece hai fatto la cosa giusta.
Insomma, sì. Perché io volevo imparare l'italiano
Mhm.
e quindi dicevo no, non mi voglio mai trovare con nessun inglese, nessun australiano, nessuno che parla
Quindi hai
inglese.
fatto un po' lo snob. Perché io volevo imparare l'italiano. So, first of all, okay, so. And I said, you did the right thing, Christian, like you actually hang out with Italians. I said, yeah, but that's because I wanted to learn Italian. So, perché volevo imparare l'italiano. Now, the one thing that I'm not sure if he meant it that way, but I often hear it from English speakers, is using the word perché, like in English you say, and because I wanted to do that. Okay, so now Italian is a bit more strict about using perché. If you mean, and since I was wanting to learn Italian, I didn't want to do something. So if you may actually mean, and since, and given that, and considering that, words, there are other words that work better than perché. One that comes to mind is poiché. Now, poiché. Maybe you don't say it when you speak, but definitely in writing. So what do you say when you speak? Visto che. Visto che, seen that. Considerato che, consider that. Or dato che, given that. So any of those would work much better than perché when you're justifying since I was doing, since this, that. Now here, I think he actually meant, and I lived with Italians because I wanted to learn Italian. So I think actually he used it right. Non mi voglio trovare con nessun inglese. I don't want to find myself. Non mi voglio trovare. I don't want to find myself. Con nessun inglese, with no English person, or with no English speaking person, obviously. Anche.
Non dico che facevo lo snob, no? Però perché io volevo imparare, mi impegnavo e non mi andava di parlare inglese, quindi lo evitavo.
Mm-hmm. Quindi hai fatto un po' lo snob. So you were kind of a snob, right? Hai fatto un po' lo snob. So hai fatto. This is the verb that we use for a lot of things. So fare, get used to saying fare a lot more than you would in English. So I'm not going to translate this, but you behaved like a snob. Quindi hai fatto lo snob. I'm not going to translate it literally. Hai fatto lo snob, you behaved a little bit like a snob. And you say, yeah, it's not like I wasn't playing being a snob, but I really wanted to learn Italian. And so, I didn't want to speak English. Non dico che facevo lo snob. I'm not saying, non dico, che facevo lo snob, that I was a snob, or that I behaved like a snob. So, non dico che, I'm not saying that. That's the same expression that you have in English and that you tend to use a lot. So, now you can start using it in Italian, because the one thing that frustrates us as intermediate or advanced speakers of a foreign language is that we still feel that it's still very book, like very clean, perfect, and it doesn't sound as authentic as we want it to be. And usually it's because we are lacking all those expressions that we have in our native language that make it sound like cool. Well, this is one of them. So, non dico che, I'm not saying that, plus whatever you want to say. Sì? Non mi andava di parlare inglese. Non mi andava di parlare. So this one is a strange usage of the verb andare. Because it's not talking about going anywhere. He's saying that he didn't feel like speaking in English. And that's because andare, when used with an indirect object pronoun, go look them up if you're not sure. But yeah, it actually means to feel like something. So it can be used with an object, and it goes with the pronoun andare and the object that you want. For example, mi va un gelato, I feel like an ice cream. Mi va un tè, I feel like a tea. Mi va un po' d'acqua, I feel like some water. So in the sense of desiring, wanting. Or it can be used with a verb, like in English, I feel like going, or I feel like speaking. In that case, the structure is a little different and you have to use the di. Quindi, mi va di mangiare, I feel like eating. Mi va di mangiare un gelato, I feel like eating an ice cream. So he didn't feel like speaking English. Non mi andava di parlare. Now he's using the imperfetto because he's telling a story, obviously. So here he's talking about wanting to avoid speaking English if he could have. Now here's a little mess because English tends to simplify all these complex tenses in the past when you have hypotheticals. Like, while we should maybe be saying in English, if you had told me, I would have done that, but it's just very complex. So we tend to simplify, like, if you told me, I do that. It's actually grammatically incorrect, but that's how we tend to say things. So we kind of simplify, or we simplify one of the two, at least, one of the two pieces. In Italian, we do that too, because we're also lazy and it's also difficult. But, so here, he actually meant, avrei voluto evitare, I would have wanted to avoid, volevo evitare, se avessi potuto, if I could have. Now, this one is complex because it's subjunctive, and I'm not going to start a conversation on the subjunctive, but here's something that I feel like I need to say. It's not the best grammatically sound thing for me to say, but I'm your coach and I want you to speak fluently, not necessarily grammatically. So there's something that Italians are doing that I say that I don't like, but then I find myself doing it too. So I guess it's taking over. And it's, instead of saying, if you had told me, se me l'avessi detto, so subjunctive in the past, se me l'avessi detto, I would have done that. L'avrei fatto, so conditional past. Quindi se me l'avessi detto, l'avrei fatto. If you had told me, I would have done it. So, complex, isn't it? In English, and it's complex in Italian. Se me l'avessi detto, l'avrei fatto. What you find that Italians are doing, which is not grammatically correct, is to use two imperfectos for both sides. So it becomes like if you told me I'd do it. Yeah? But it's back then. So the way this would be, I'm not going to write it down, otherwise I'm going to get all these hate comments because it's not grammatically right. Italians, chill. We say it, so it's okay to teach it. Se me lo dicevi, lo facevo. Now, it sounds horrible, and there are times when it really stands out as being wrong, but there are times when it's almost passable. So, I'm not saying that you should do it, I'm just saying that it's done. So, se me lo dicevi, instead of se me lo avessi detto. Because se me lo avessi detto implies that you know the subjunctive, and that you know the past tense of the subjunctive, and many of you still don't, and it's fine. Like, it's not fine, but eventually you have to know it, but... So you can get away with an imperfetto, that's all I'm saying, ok? Basta. It's a little secret.
Se potessi, se mi chiedevano qualcosa o se mi parlavano in inglese, c'è anche una frase. Io sempre rispondevo in italiano e poi si rendevano conto che io volevo imparare, che volevo parlare solo italiano e basta.
Si rendevano conto che volevo parlare italiano. So, rendersi conto. It's an expression that means to realize. So now this one is used in the imperfetto, but I just want to show you how it works. So, rendersi conto. It's got nothing to do with conto, which is the bill. So, mi rendo conto che. I realize that. As in, I become aware of something. I am aware of something. Mi rendo conto che sei stanco. Ma I realize that you're tired. But. So it's to realize in that sense. Like, I accept that you're tired. Usually there's a but not necessarily. But so, rendersi conto is to realize. Mi rendo conto, ti rendi conto, si rende conto. Therefore, it uses the reflexive pronouns. That's what it is. Si rendevano conto, when they realize themselves that I wanted to do something. So, rendersi conto che, followed by a sentence, which has a verb. Like, for example, mi rendo conto che sei stanco. So that mi rendo conto che starts a new sentence, that you're tired. So, mi rendo conto che sei stanco. O rendersi conto di, which is the same as in English, to realize, to become aware of something. So, mi rendo conto di quanto mi ami. I realize how much you love me. So, mi rendo conto di quanto. So, basically, I'm using di because what follows is effect. Mi rendo conto di come si prepara la pizza. I realize it's a strange sentence, but my sentence is always strange. Quindi questo è un consiglio che tu daresti se loro
Ma certo.
andassero in Italia?
Sì, perché è ovvio, se vai in Italia è sempre più facile parlare inglese perché è la vostra madrelingua. Ma se già sai qualcosa e se gli italiani vedono che ti stai sforzando.
Ma all'inizio, quando tu non sapevi molto, parlavi un po' così, chiedevi scusa in continuazione? Cioè tu quando parlavi con qualcuno,
Mhm.
ah no scusa parlo male italiano oppure parlavi e basta? Cioè, un consiglio che tu daresti se loro andassero in Italia. So, an advice, so in English it's a piece of advice, in Italian it's an advice. So, un consiglio che tu daresti, that you would give, se loro andassero in Italia, if they went to Italy, they is you guys, okay? So, is this something that you would tell them to do, like hang out just with Italians, and also to always only speak Italian? And so, as Christian says, when people approached him, when he would say something and people responded in English, he would keep going with Italian. That's why I say, like, that's a bit snobbish, isn't it? Especially if you're speaking to people who speak your native language, but it's the only way, it's the best way to actually make it, to actually pick up the language. Now, you're not going to learn Italian from another American or another Brit. Maybe you would, but that's not the point. The point is that you are not falling into the trap of finding yourself speaking English a lot. Now, what Christian is saying is actually not speaking English to Italians, obviously. That's what he meant. But the fact that he wanted to live with Italians is also has to do with this. Like, you don't want to be talking English to anybody, really. So that's something that he would definitely recommend that you do. And is somebody starts saying something in English, get back to them in Italian. At some point, they will realize that you are really making an effort to speak their language, and they'll barge in, especially because most Italians don't like having to speak English unless they are super fans of the English language. And there's a lot of them, but overall not many. Benissimo, abbiamo finito un'altra lezione di grammatica o di spiegazione per Italian Accelerator, questo è il numero 8. Mi raccomando, iscrivetevi così ricevete una notifica. You need to, want to, should, subscribe and to get some notifications, bla bla bla, sound drunk. Allora, questo è tutto, ci vediamo nel prossimo episodio dove continuiamo ad analizzare la conversazione fra me e Christian di episodio 8. E poi continuiamo con l'episodio 9. Ciao ciao!